Welcome to SpaceDoc. I'm your SpaceDoc, Dr. James, a real-life planetary scientist here to share my passion for space, spaceships, and the Star Trek universe. Today we're looking at two brand new Hallmark ornaments from 2024, both of the USS Enterprise 1701-B from Star Trek Generations. And I have the two versions that were released this year, the standard version, the fresh out of SpaceDoc version over here. But I also have the exclusive San Diego Comic-Con version, which comes with, yes, you read that right, Nexus Damaged. So this is a Nexus battle damage version of the same ornament. And we're going to have a look at both of them here today. So let's start with the standard version. So here is the standard version of the Hallmark USS Enterprise NCC-1701-B released in 2024. At first glance, this is a pretty nice, clean ship. I'm excited that they went back and covered Star Trek Generations, the first of the TNG movies. A mixed bag of a movie. It has some highlights, and one of those highlights is definitely the Enterprise-B making its first on-screen debut, at least in a form that isn't mounted to a wall. So we're going to have a detailed look at this ship and the model. And why don't we start from the top, from the bridge, and work our way down from the top of the ship down through the bottom. So at the very top of the ship is the bridge, which here is pretty noticeable for being a little bit bulbous. And that is because on this model it has a light function. I've already put the batteries in, and the bridge is the button. So I've just pressed the button, and you can see it lights up the nacelles in a very pretty blue color. But that does mean that the bridge is a little bit odd, especially when viewed from very edge on. The lights only stay on for a few seconds, but I think that's fine. And I'll come back to the lighting later. So the ship is a very nice clean white, not much in the way of Aztecing or paneling other than the molded in lines here. These are actually molded. I don't believe they're painted. Let me get up close and see if we can get them into focus. They might have a slight wash. Actually, I'm gonna have to pull it in front of the camera. I don't think that there's a wash that's highlighting those. I think that these are just really nice, deep etched in panel lines in an otherwise sort of white, creamy colored hull. There's a lot of details on the ship. These yellow rectangular segments with little extrusions on them. Those are the ball phaser turrets on the top of the saucer. There are some on the bottom of the saucer as well. There's similar colored yellow RCS engines on the edge of the saucer. RCS is a real term we use in space science to describe a reaction control system that is used for changing the orientation of the ship. But the real highlight, I think, are the nice blues, these like turquoisey blue colors that extend behind the bridge and throughout the rest of the ship, in addition to the nice red, crisp red livery and registry. So that looks pretty good. There's a lot of sculpted detail on the back of the saucer as we move towards the impulse deck. All looks pretty nice. On the edge of the saucer, there's not much detail. It's a pretty flat white, no molded detail, no printed windows or anything. There are on the Excelsior class several decks of windows here that were probably just too small to try to print or accurately capture here. So I'm okay with it for a model of this scale. So you can see it's pretty small. Moving down to the bottom of the saucer, again, really nice crisp panel lines, nice detail including some blue on the sensor dome down here. Again, some phaser turrets, a nice registry in red and black, The B is maybe a little bit tricky to clearly read. It's just a little bit overly filled, but it's still recognizable as the B. Let's go to the back of the saucer, to the impulse deck. So the Enterprise-B is notable for having 4 sets of impulse engines. I'm going to struggle to get them in camera here very well. There's these 2 really large outboard impulse engines. Here just molded in gray. Not much detail in there. There are also the standard Excelsior impulse engines, which are much smaller by comparison, in the middle of the neck. Again, no real color, molding, or detail in the impulse engines, but that's okay. The hook for the ornament comes out of the back of the secondary hull. It's not too conspicuous. I mean, it is an ornament after all. So let's move down to the secondary hull. The neck is this really nice silver. It has a very finely lineated texture, which you can barely see on camera, but that's really nice. This silver really isn't used anywhere else in the model, as best I can tell, but it really does help make the neck pop. You can see these 2, I believe they're ports or loading docks on the Excelsior. I don't believe they're torpedo launchers, or at least they're not the only torpedo launchers. On the Excelsior class, there are these small launchers down on the indented onto the secondary hull. The secondary hull itself is nice. There are actually some little teeny tiny indented windows, which are hard to see, but they are there. That's a nice detail. And I can make them pop a little bit with the right lighting. Be nice if those windows were on the edge of the saucer as well, but so it goes. It's nice that they're down here, otherwise this would be a very flat region. The Starfleet branding on the side looks nice, very, very fine scale print. Nice red and silver. Again, the turquoise stripe running along the top edge of the secondary hull. And then we get down to the deflector region, the very important deflector region, which will play a bigger role in the battle damage version. And so, of course, if you aren't aware, when they designed the Enterprise-B for Star Trek Generations, they wanted to add components that they could damage without damaging the underlying Excelsior model. Because this was still, at the time, they were still using proper models. So they added a bunch of details, including these 2 large impulse engines, this boat hull along the secondary hull, and a variety of other details along the warp nacelles and in other places. I really like the boat hull design that they added for the Enterprise-B. It's cool, it's different, it's sleek, but also communicates that this is somewhat of a different design or an updated design. On this model, it looks pretty good. There's no windows or anything on the boat hull, which I think is true to the reference. My one big negative on this is actually the deflector dish itself, which is not painted. So you can see it is molded down in there. Try to get some good lighting into the deflector housing. So there is a round deflector dish down there, and I really, really wish that they had painted it blue. Even if it was the same turquoise as the rest of the ship, that would have helped make this pop. And that's really, this is a focal point of the ship. It's important to the plot, it's important to the movie, so that would have been a nice thing to have done, but alas. Down here, there's a very obvious battery compartment. I notice as I look at this in the camera, that bolt is very noticeable, the seam lines are very noticeable, but as you're holding this, as you're looking at this on display, I can very easily forgive that screw. It is necessary for having batteries for powering the lighting function, and there really is nowhere else on this model to put those batteries than in the secondary hole. So I think that's fine. Moving back to the back of the secondary hull, you can see this loading bay down here. In the actual ship, in the actual model and the VFX for Excelsior classes, this is actually far more hollow. Here it's largely closed off. Again, likely because there's batteries back there, they need space, so they can't make that as hollow as it truly is, which I think is forgivable. There is the always necessary copyright information in kind of an annoying black. The turquoise is nice. And actually, I said there was no more silver on the model, but I guess I was wrong. There's a little bit of silver back here for a variety of equipment on the back underneath the saucer, underneath the shuttle bay, probably tractor emitters and that sort of thing. A little bit of silver also shows up on the shuttle bay doors. Pretty good back there. So let's move to the pylons and the nacelles. The Enterprise-B, like the Excelsior, technically should have a gap between the pylon and the secondary hull, sort of where my fingernail is. And here it's filled in. The pylons are a little thicker than they would actually be. And that again is of course because there are wires running through there to power the lights in the nacelles. So I think that's a totally fine compromise. Usually the Hallmark ships, or I should say often the Hallmark ships, have some inflated region necessary either to hold batteries or wiring. Sometimes they can get away from needing to do that. Other times it's unavoidable given the sort of design of Starfleet vessels. And I think this is totally fine. In contrast, the Discovery ornament that they did, they had to quite severely inflate the secondary hull to hold the batteries, and that's a little bit more annoying. On to the nacelles. These look pretty good. Again, they are lit, so why don't I engage the lighting feature? So you can see the light comes out of the top. It's a nice blue. There are gaps for the blue in the front, none in the back, although as I hold this in just the right angle, you can get a little bit of light bleed on the back of that port nacelle. Actually, it's on both nacelles, but it's a Christmas ornament. It's totally fine. It's a nice bright blue. It would have been, again, beautiful if they had gotten that deflector dish illuminated with the same blue, but so it goes. Overall, these are really nice. There's a registry, again, on the back of the nacelles on both the inside and outside segments. Some nice blue again. And these look very nice. So all in all, this is a pretty outstanding model. It's nicely detailed. It doesn't have necessarily all the windows or the Aztec paneling that might add a little bit more texture to the rest of the ship, but and of course it lacks a painted deflector, but for a Hallmark ornament that's not too expensive, I think this is totally reasonable. Looks great. And I'm glad that they finally made the Enterprise-B. Perfect ornament for Star Trek Generations. Although I guess what would have been cheeky is if they had released this and then also released that stroby spherical ornament that Picard sees when he's in the Nexus. That would have been a fun little reference, albeit it may not look as nice as an actual spaceship on the Christmas tree. One thing I'll note, when I got this, I was having a hard time actually getting the lighting to work and to stay on. It managed to fix itself. I probably jostled the batteries or wiring around enough that it stuck. Originally when I was pushing the button, it would only light up for a split second, but So far, so good. So with the standard ornament done, let's put it aside and pull out the Nexus Damaged San Diego Comic-Con variant. So here is the Comic-Con exclusive. One thing you can notice right off the bat, this is weathered. There is a sort of gray, streaky wash going over much of the ship. It's very noticeable on the saucer. Overall, the most of the paint and mold details are identical to the standard version, with the one obvious example of something very different near the main deflector. This is, of course, in the movie where the Nexus portion of the Nexus impacts the Enterprise-B, rips off part of the hull, and sweeps Captain Kirk away into the Nexus to have a rendezvous with fate. On this model, there is a very obvious dark gray, black painted texture. I think there actually is a slight molded difference here, which I'll try to catch with the light. You can see that there's sort of a gridded pattern there that I believe is actually a molded detail difference on this version compared to the original. Again, it would have been great if that main deflector had been painted, but alas. Now, I was fortunate enough to go to San Diego Comic-Con this year and pick one of these up. Waited in line a long time to get one of these. I don't mind this being a Comic-Con exclusive because it's very similar to the standard version. In fact, I suspect you could take a standard version of the Enterprise-B and make it look like this, or even maybe even better, by giving it some battle damage yourself. But this is was a nice little treat when I went to San Diego Comic-Con. And just like the Prime version, it lights up. Looks great to me. So let's put these two side by side and get a sense of how different the two are. It really just comes down to this gray wash that they added to the Nexus Damaged version, with the most major changes being at the deflector, where I do believe there is a different sculpt used for that boat hull on the Nexus Damaged version. There's a little bit of irony that they added in all these structural components, the boat hull, the extra impulse engines, and then they never ever removed them from the original Excelsior model. They reused it with a different registry as the USS Lakota in Star Trek Deep Space Nine, but I don't believe they ever removed the add-ons from Star Trek Generations. These are wonderful models. Let's actually compare them to some other versions of the Enterprise-B that you may have. So I have a lot of Enterprise-Bs. Maybe it's because that movie came out at the right time in my childhood that it really imprinted on me. Maybe it's because I watched the VHS of that movie so many times. I developed an affinity for the Enterprise-B, even though it's only on screen for such a short amount of time. But because of that, I have a lot of models and toys of this ship, and I picked out only a few to show to give a sense of scale and comparison. And the first is the one that I think is the closest in scale and probably also cost at this point, the Eaglemoss regular size version of the Enterprise-B. So I'm going to take it off of its Eaglemoss stand, posterity, 5831A/A. So this is a really nice model. Again, this, unlike the Hallmark ones, which are all plastic, this has some die-cast components. The saucer is die-cast. There is a bit more detail on this model, which I think is to be expected. This was designed as a model, not as a holiday ornament. So it has things like, it has a little bit of Aztecing patterns on the hull, has a little bit more slightly different coloring on the with regards to the turquoise, but what is most important for this comparison is their scale. So you can see the regular sized Enterprise-B from Eaglemoss is slightly smaller than the Hallmark model, but they're very close in size. So if you were to have these on your desk or on a bookshelf, these would be pretty comparable. Again, the Eaglemoss model up here on the top. No battle damage version, at least no officially battle damage version of the Eaglemoss model. But one thing they did, at least in this small one, was they did at least paint that deflector dish. It's nothing to write home about, but they did it. I wish that the Hallmark version had just a little bit of paint down there to capture the deflector dish. But all in all, it's pretty similar. Even this model doesn't have the fully deep cargo bay down here. They painted their impulse engines, so they stand out with a nice red, both the larger outboard impulse engines and the smaller inboard impulse engines. But again, the real point here is to show that these are pretty comparable in size and scale. And in terms of painted detail, they're not terribly far off. The Eaglemoss one is slightly better. One other thing that I'll note, the Eaglemoss version does have the painted striping along the edge of the saucer that the Hallmark model lacks. So I'm going to set this one aside. I'll pull up another Enterprise-B for comparison. The next one for comparison is not terribly different. It is the XL Enterprise-B from Eaglemoss. And I bring this one out because this one, take it off the stand, it's pretty similar to the regular size. There are some slight improvements, but this is a nice, much bigger model, so I wanted to bring out something that bracketed the size. Because of its larger size, it has a lot more finer scale detail. It actually has a translucent blue molded deflector dish. It has a lot more paneling on the surface. This is a pretty nice XL from Eaglemoss. There are very few things that this model has or doesn't have that aren't on the smaller Eaglemoss model. One exception is it doesn't have the blue sensor grid lines that run along the edge of the smaller Eaglemoss model. But here, let's put these side by side so you get a sense of scale. The Hallmark model is pretty close in scale to the regular sized Eaglemoss model. It's about, 66% the size of the XL version. So at the end of the day, the details are pretty similar across them. There are some obvious deficiencies with regards to the Hallmark model, but Hallmark model is also the only one of these three that lights up. So it's sort of a trade that you have to make. Finally, I'll bring out one more Enterprise-B, the first Enterprise-B I actually got, and that is the Micro Machine version. So So this is the Galoob Micro Machine Enterprise-B from their Star Trek Generations set, which was a great set. You can still find them all over eBay and in vintage toy stores. It came with the Enterprise-B, a Klingon bird of prey, and a saucer separating Enterprise-D. Great little set. Actually, over the years have gotten many of these, and I had Battle Damage one myself. This is not that one. This one is relatively pristine. And honestly, has almost the same amount of detail as these other models. Some deficiencies. No blue deflector that I keep harping on in the middle. But by and large, great little toy. Perfect for a little kid or a grown-up kid like myself. The Micro Machine version is quite a bit smaller than the Hallmark version. But that's to be expected. This is of course all plastic, pretty flexible, kid-friendly plastic. And as I said, these are now just but a few of the Enterprise-Bs in my collection. I have, gosh, at least 3 other versions of the Enterprise-B. And if you're interested in those, let me know. I'd be happy to do reviews of individual models or sets of starships if you really want a comparison. So that has been the Hallmark 2004 Ornaments of the USS Enterprise NCC-1701-B from the movie Star Trek Generations, both the standard version and the San Diego Comic-Con exclusive Nexus Battle Damaged variant, which I neglected to mention, as per the box, was only one of 3,000 produced. I'm sure if you look around online, you can probably find some in the secondhand market. But that has been this review with SpaceDoc. Please let me know what you think. If you like this, please do leave a like, leave a comment, subscribe if you're new here, and let me know what you think worked and didn't work with this review, and if there's anything you'd like me to review in the future. I have a huge backlog of Star Trek ships, toys, and other collectibles, and other non-Star Trek things as well. And actually, over this holiday season, I picked up a bunch more. So if folks are interested in more reviews, unboxes, what have you, please let me know. And with that, thank you very much. Live long and prosper.